Quick one. Last video hit over 100 comments, which is absolutely mind-blowing for this channel. Let's try that again for this video. Comment down what you think about these stories, or just a hello, and the team will reply. We always reply to the comments. As always, please like and subscribe and help this channel grow. Thank you. My name is Amy, and I wanted to share my traumatic experience buying a house on Craigslist that ended up being a total scam. This turned into an absolute nightmare situation that cost my husband Jack and I our entire life savings. Looking back, there were so many red flags that we obliviously ignored in our excitement to become homeowners. Jack and I had been renting a cramped one-bedroom apartment in downtown Kansas City for over 5 years. We were finally at a financially stable point in our careers to start looking for our first home to purchase. I was casually browsing Craigslist real estate listings one Saturday morning, not really expecting to find anything good. But suddenly an ad popped up for a gorgeous 4-bedroom, 2.5 bathroom house in a quiet Kansas City suburb. The ad included stunning photos showing hardwood floors throughout, a big backyard with a deck, and tons of natural light. It was listed at an unbelievably cheap price of only $175,000, which I thought was odd. I immediately called the number to get more details. A friendly-sounding woman named Linda answered and explained the home belonged to her elderly uncle. She said he had passed away recently, and she was selling it for him to quickly close out his estate. When I asked why the large house was listed so far below market value, Linda claimed her uncle wanted it sold fast and easy without any hassles. She said he had lived there over 30 years and it was completely move-in ready after having a top-to-bottom renovation. I was instantly intrigued and told my husband Jack about it when he got home from work. He was dubious at first, but agreed it seemed worth looking into as the price was so tempting. We arranged a showing for the very next day. When we pulled up to the house, it looked exactly like the photos, a charming 2-story home with a big front porch. Linda greeted us at the door and gave us a quick tour of the interior. The inside was just as lovely as she had described over the phone. Everything looked freshly updated with nice finishes. We fell absolutely in love with it and decided to put in an offer on the spot before someone else snatched it up. Linda seemed thrilled we weren't even asking to negotiate the price down. She raved about what amazing new homeowners we would be. In our excitement, Jack and I ignored some big warning signs. But at the time, we were just so thrilled to finally achieve our dream of owning our own home after years stuck renting. I now realize Linda deliberately exploited our emotional desire to finally become homeowners. She expertly manipulated our enthusiasm to blind us to the sketchy details. Linda quickly emailed over a standard purchase contract stating we would buy the house for the full asking price of $175,000. It required us to wire the complete funds to an escrow account to secure the sale. She claimed it had to be done this way since her uncle was deceased. Again, we foolishly rushed through signing the contract electronically and wired the money without thinking twice. We didn't even hire a real estate lawyer to review the documents, which was incredibly stupid. Linda reassured us multiple times that this was a legitimate process and there was nothing to worry about. The supposed closing date arrived a few days later. Linda texted me saying she had left the front door unlocked, and we could go inside the house now since it officially was ours. She also provided the garage code and instructed us to promptly change all the locks for security. Jack and I were absolutely exhilarated. We immediately drove over and changed out all the locks, so excited to finally have our own house. We started moving in boxes and planning renovations we wanted to do. 2 days later, I was inside unpacking when I heard loud, authoritative knocking at the front door. I opened it to find 2 police officers standing there along with an older man and woman. The officers had grave expressions, and a couple looked upset. My heart immediately sank. The police explained that the elderly man was the actual legal owner of the house. He had just returned from a long vacation to find strangers living in his home and all the locks changed. The true owner was alarmed someone had sold his house without permission while he was away. The officers asked for proof we had purchased the home. Of course, we had nothing legitimate except phony documents Linda had fabricated and emailed to us. The owner was furious that his family member Linda had totally betrayed his trust. She had been house sitting while he vacationed, but instead she illegally sold off his home and pocketed the money after deceiving us. The police regretfully informed us there was likely nothing they could do. Since we had willingly wired the funds without doing proper due diligence, we were likely responsible. The owner firmly demanded we vacate immediately and threatened to press charges if we refused. Utterly embarrassed and devastated, we silently gathered up our boxes and left. I was nearly in tears as the reality sunk in that we were now out $175,000. All our hard-earned savings was gone, and we still had no home of our own. We clearly should have had a lawyer thoroughly vet the documents Linda sent before blindly trusting her. But we let emotions cloud our judgment and ignored obvious warning signs. We were too caught up in the thrill of achieving our dream of homeownership. The incredibly cheap price should have been a clear red flag something was amiss. But in our excitement, we didn't stop to consider the situation rationally. This painful experience taught me valuable lessons. I learned to never trust strangers implicitly or make major financial decisions when under strong emotions. It's easy to get caught up in fantasies and blind yourself to dishonest schemes. We clearly failed to do proper research to validate Linda's claims, which cost us everything. I'll also never make a big transaction on Craigslist again without verifying credentials. There are dishonest people out there ready to manipulate those who are vulnerable or desperate. I hope others can avoid the mistakes we made and not get swindled by scams. Don't ignore warning signs or let emotions overwhelm your judgment. Losing our life savings due to our own foolishness and impulsiveness was devastating. But by sharing my story, maybe others can be spared this financial and emotional trauma. I learned the hard way that if something seems too good to be true, it usually is. Always thoroughly verify before sending money to strangers, or you may end up in your own horror story. Our dream of homeownership quickly turned into a nightmare, all because we failed to heed obvious red flags when we had the chance. I hope my painful experience can help prevent others from becoming manipulation victims too. I'll never forget the fateful day I responded to that suspicious Craigslist ad. Money was tight as a single mom, so I jumped at the chance for an affordable at-home haircut from someone calling themselves Freddie. Little did I know I was walking into a nightmare from which I'd never fully awaken. The ad was vague, simply advertising haircuts for dirt cheap in a sketchy part of town. My desperation overruled my better judgment. Arriving at the faded apartment building, I hesitated before knocking on a chipped door. Muffled crashes came from inside, setting my nerves on edge. When the door creaked open, a wild-eyed woman peered out. Her own hair was a tangled bird's nest piled haphazardly on her head. She greeted me eagerly, aching me inside the dim, cluttered space. I nearly tripped over the piles of magazines and takeout containers littering the stained carpet. The whole apartment reeked of stale air, cigarettes, and hair dye. Freddie gestured toward a rickety folding chair in the center of the room. Trimmings from past victims littered the floor around it. As I reluctantly sat, she whipped out a cape and fastened it tightly around my neck. Her movements were jerky and erratic, like a puppet controlled by unseen strings. Freddie hummed an eerie, off-key tune as she surveyed my hair, running her fingers through it aggressively. Her cracked nails snagged, making me wince. Meeting my eyes in the grimy mirror, she gave a yellow-toothed grin that sent a chill down my spine. "Don't worry, honey, you're in good hands," Freddie rasped, though her crazed expression suggested otherwise. I forced a polite smile in return, praying this would be over quickly. She hacked away aggressively at my hair, shearing off huge chunks with reckless abandon. I sat rigid, not daring to move or complain as she wielded the scissors manically. The clipping and sniffing was punctuated by her off-key humming, which gradually became more agitated. My scalp sung as Freddie yanked my hair this way and that, focused intently on her work. After what felt like an eternity, she spun me to face the spotted mirror. My heart sank at the lopsided, uneven disaster atop my head. Patches of raw scalp peeked through, marks of her clipper's unsteady dance. I looked like I'd been mauled by a rabid dog. Me, my eyes in the reflection. Freddie gave another unsettling grin. I chose my words carefully, not wanting to provoke her. "It's quite a bit shorter than I expected," I said, forcing a polite smile. Freddie's cheerful facade evaporated, replaced by deranged fury. "Shorter than you expected," she thundered. I cowered as she loomed over me, ranting and raving. Her voice grew louder and more shrill. Spittle flew from her mouth as she gesticulated wildly. Backing away, I searched frantically for escape as her tirade went on, but she had me trapped in that chair. Then Freddie pulled out a can of pepper spray from her pocket and unleashed it at my face. The piercing burn consumed my senses. I screamed in agony, blinded and disoriented. Staggering to my feet, I ripped off the cape and groped helplessly through the stinging fog. I could hear Freddie cackling with sadistic delight nearby. Somehow I made it outside, fumbling my way down the hall as I bounced off the walls. I burst through the exit and gulped the fresh air, wheezing and whimpering in pain. My eyes felt like they were on fire. I scrambled to my car and sped to the ER, tires squealing. At the hospital, they thoroughly flushed my inflamed eyes and tended to the welts covering my face and neck. The doctors were alarmed when I described the attack. Once I could see well enough, they had me work with a police sketch artist. I recreated Freddy's wild visage, the image seared into my traumatized mind. When the officers arrived at the apartment, it was empty. Freddy had vanished without a trace. No identification or records tied to her name could be found. The menacing Craigslist ad had been deleted as if it never existed. She left no trail, no clues behind besides my mutilated hair and tormented memories. In the aftermath, I was consumed by paranoia, positive Freddy would return to finish what she started. I jumped at every creak and thud, visions of her lurking outside my windows haunting me. I avoided leaving my home, fearful she would leave from the shadows if I dared step outside. I realized just how vulnerable I was with my daughter depending on me. We installed new locks, cameras, security alarms, but still I did not feel safe. Deep down, I knew my fears were irrational. The police reassured me Freddy posed no active threat, likely just a random deranged stranger who attacked impulsively. But their logic offered little comfort. The memories of her crazed eyes and my helplessness continued to torment my every waking moment. I became hyper-vigilant about securing my home. Each night I checked every lock multiple times before retreating to my bedroom, but I barely slept, instead patrolling the house listening for any unusual sounds. A lifetime of looking over my shoulder stretched before me. I stopped letting my daughter play outside or walk to school alone. I cut off friends, avoided going out, withdrew from the world into my self-imposed prison. But I knew if I let my guard down, Freddy would return for me. One restless night, I again heard faint scratching coming from the bathroom. My chest tightened, pulse thrumming in my ears. Though my hands trembled uncontrollably, I forced myself to investigate. Visions of Freddy lurking behind the shower curtain flashed through my mind. Steeling my nerves, I pushed the door open, braced for her crazed gaze. But instead, a filthy stray dog cowered in the tub, staring up pitifully. Relief washed over me as I gently lifted the trembling pup, guiding him outside. Only then did I notice the makeshift collar around his neck, a crude Craigslist ad scrawl on scrap paper, advertising a free dog. Dread gripped my chest. It had to be Freddy's doing. She had found us. In the weeks thereafter, I descended deeper into paranoid isolation, my shattered nerves unable to take the constant stress. I hardly recognized myself or the shell of life I was living. I lost my job, my social connections, my stability. But I knew if I let my guard down, Freddy would strike. It was in one of those endless, anxious nights that I again heard scratching from the bathroom. Though my hands still trembled, I again investigated. And there crouched another dirty, helpless stray, gazing up in desperate plea. Attached to his matted fur with twine was another hastily scrawled Craigslist ad. My fraying mind finally snapped. I saw Freddy everywhere, in the shadows and strangers' faces, lurking outside my bedroom window. No matter how thoroughly I fortified my home, how many alarms and locks I installed, I could not escape the gnawing certainty that she was coming for me. A horror from which I'll never awaken, no matter how far I try to run or how high I build my walls against the darkness. I never could have imagined that the simple act of posting my apartment on Craigslist to sublet would spiral into a living nightmare. As a college student with a tight budget, I was excited at first when I made the post right before going abroad one semester. Little did I know dark forces were already conspiring to exploit my normal attempt to cover rent into a bizarre scheme that would have me fearing for my safety in my own home. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon when I snapped some photos of my furnished one-bedroom apartment close to campus and drafted up the listing. Cute apartment available for sublet. Hardwood floors, great natural light, full kitchen. On number 10 bus road, 10 minutes to the university. Available May-August, $800/month. Seemed innocent enough. Within a couple hours, I was thrilled to already have interest pouring in my email. I felt relieved that subletting my place would be easy. One message stood out, a guy named Mike who said he was a grad student at my school. He asked if he could come that very evening to see the apartment, said he was eager to move quickly if it was a fit. I hesitated since it was such short notice, but figured why not capitalize on the enthusiasm. I wrote Mike back with my address and confirmed he could come by around 7 p.m. Right on time, Mike arrived, nicely dressed and carrying a small notebook. We shook hands and I showed him around while we made introductory small talk. He said he loved the bright living room and large kitchen with updated appliances. I was immediately at ease. Mike seemed totally normal, asking thoughtful questions about the terms of the sublet and neighborhood details. After about 15 minutes, Mike said he was very interested and would circle back in a couple days once he had compared some other options. I thanked him and felt I had just found a perfect, uncomplicated subletter. Little did I know darker schemes were already in motion that would upend everything. The following evening around 6 p.m., I had just finished making dinner when there was an unexpected knock at my front door. I opened it puzzled, only to find two young women standing there with suitcases and backpacks. "Hi there, we're here about the apartment rental," one asked with a smile. My jaw nearly hit the floor. I stammered awkwardly that I hadn't been expecting anyone else and asked where they had heard about an apartment. The girl pulled out her phone to show me an email thread with Angela confirming a 6 p.m. showing today. My heart sank and I broke out in a cold sweat. Someone was impersonating me and giving out my address to strangers under the guise of an apartment listing. I politely explained the situation to the girls and sent them on their way, my hand shaking slightly as I closed the door. How could this be happening? I rushed to check Craigslist again, only to discover a duplicate of my listing now posted under a different email address. Furious and unnerved, I immediately tried flagging and removing the fraudulent post, but it was no use. Over the next week, the nightmare only deepened. More and more prospective renters started arriving expecting apartment tours or even to move right in. No matter how many times I took down this phantom listing, an altered duplicate would reappear hours later like clockwork. I was soon bombarded with a deluge of emails and phone calls day and night from people wanting to schedule showings or ask about the application process. When I would tell them there had been a mistake, some would become angry and argumentative, convinced I was backing out of a rental agreement. I started anxiously screening all my calls and keeping the front door bolted at all times. I barely slept at night, listening intently for any strange sounds. The terrifying climax came over a week into the ordeal. I came home well past midnight after studying late at a library to the horrifying sight of my apartment door ajar and lights on inside. I froze, listening, only to hear voices and shuffling sounds. My hands shaking uncontrollably, I peered through a window only to see a couple in their 30s unpacking suitcases in my living room. In utter panic now, I called the police and waited by my car hyperventilating. Eventually, two officers arrived and I led them cautiously inside. The couple greeted us in bewilderment, insisting they were moving into their new rental per the agreement. As the officers questioned everyone, the couple continued protesting and pointing to emails from Angela, giving them the keys and authorizing a late move-in. After what felt like an eternity of trying to reason with them, police finally escorted the angry couple out of my apartment. They took my statement and recommended I post warning signs given the ongoing scam listings. I spent that night curled up on the couch wide awake, listening for any sound, wishing morning would come. In the following days, I taped bright neon signs on my doors stating clearly that there was no apartment for rent. I filed a police report on the identity theft and fraudulent listings as well. Thankfully, after another week of ignoring knocks and emails, the incessant visitors tapered off once the scammer seemed to surrender, though I never discovered who it was. I still feel scared recalling those endlessly stressful days and nights, never knowing what each hour would bring. I was constantly on edge in my own home, listening for the next visitor who could turn angry or violent when their supposed rental fell through. It taught me important lessons about protecting my identity and property online against the sinister forces ready to strike. Now I am much more vigilant about safely vetting potential renters or buyers through verified sites. I never want to relive the emotional turmoil of that Craigslist nightmare. In hindsight, simply posting my apartment online made me the target of a devious plot to hijack my identity for profit, with no care for the real human cost. For about a week, I had been speaking to a man on Craigslist regarding a used laptop he had posted for sale. After a slew of cancellations supposedly due to family issues, he eventually provided an address that checked out on Google Maps, and we organized for me to pick up the laptop that evening. I was excited to get a good deal on a laptop for school, so I overlooked the red flags of his evasiveness. When I arrived at the dimly lit apartment complex, I gave him a call as instructed, but he refused to provide a unit number, instead giving vague directions in broken English. He directed me down a winding pathway and eventually gave a unit number that didn't even exist in that complex. Warning bells started going off in my mind, and I hurried back to the safety of my car. The complex was eerily quiet, not a soul in sight. As I locked the doors, heart racing, I noticed a shadowy figure emerge across the street. Dressed head to toe in black with a balaclava, he strode toward me purposefully. To my horror, I realized he was gripping a machete in his left hand that extended from his knee down to his foot. As he approached my driver's side window, he rapped on the glass menacingly and uttered in a chilling tone, "Hey buddy, give me the money." I froze momentarily, unable to comprehend this was really happening. Snapping back to my senses, I threw the car in reverse and peeled out backward as fast as I could. The man pounded his fist on the window as I sped away, his eyes full of malintent. My only thought was getting somewhere public, somewhere safe. I raced out of the complex onto the main road, my hands shaking and knuckles white from my death grip on the steering wheel. I hoped another car, or preferably the police, would come along, but the road was empty. Just then, as if in answer to my prayers, I saw a bus approaching in my rear view mirror. I skidded to a halt and jumped out, waving frantically as the bus neared. But the driver breezed right past me, despite my screams for help. At that moment, I truly thought that was the end for me. Just then, another car came up behind the bus, and I ran into the road, forcing them to stop. The middle-aged couple inside looked shocked as I begged them to call the police, but they merely rolled up their windows and shook their heads, making a hand motion toward the bus up ahead. Having no other options, I sprinted after the bus as it pulled away, somehow managing to catch up as it stopped at a light. The driver opened the door hesitantly, and I collapsed into the nearest seat, breathless and trembling. The few passengers eyed me warily and moved to the back, no one bothering to ask if I needed help. Fighting back tears, I called the police with shaky hands and did my best to explain what had happened. The dispatcher tried to calm me down, assuring me a patrol car was on the way. Those 10 agonizing minutes felt like hours, my leg bouncing uncontrollably as I kept glancing out the window. At last a squad car pulled up, lights flashing. 2 officers approached the bus, and I shakily recounted my story. They transported me back to the apartment complex to get more details and search for the assailant. But he was long gone, having disappeared into the night. The next day, I received numerous calls from the man's number, asking where I had gone the previous night. Each ring of the phone sent a chill down my spine. I let go to voicemail every time, too disturbed to hear his voice. In the aftermath, I replayed the chilling encounter over and over, noting the many red flags. The evasiveness about meeting, asking for details about my car and appearance, especially directing me to a non-existent location far from public view. I chastised myself for being so foolish. How could I not have realized it was a setup? I had always felt safe conducting transactions through Craigslist, never imagining myself becoming the victim of such a horrific crime. The emotional trauma lingers as I struggle to sleep at night, plagued by nightmares where I come face to face with the attacker again. Sudden noises make me jump, and I find myself constantly looking over my shoulder, leery of strangers. My family worries for my safety, rarely letting me leave the house alone anymore. I know they mean well, but their overprotectiveness only exacerbates my anxiety. I just want to feel normal again, to not be crippled by fear of what lurks outside my front door. With time, I hope to heal and not let this experience rule my life, but my innocence and trust in others has been shattered. I replay every detail, wondering how I could have prevented this or if I somehow brought it upon myself. The police were sympathetic, but urged me to be more cautious when meeting unknown parties in the future. I know they are right, but it pains me to lose that sense of optimism and good faith I once had. For now, I'm taking things one day at a time. Some days are better than others. My hope is that the paranoia and mistrust will eventually subside as the memory of that night fades. I strive to not become cynical or withdrawn, though it's difficult not to see the worst in people after such a traumatic experience. But I refuse to be defined by what that stranger tried to do to me. I will reclaim my life and my capacity to see the good in this world. The road back to wholeness is long, but small steps each day will get me there. I was browsing Craigslist one evening, looking for a good deal on a used car. Money was tight as a single guy supporting myself, so I needed something affordable but still reliable to get to my job across town. I clicked through the various listings absent-mindedly, not expecting to find anything special. That's when an ad for a 2009 Honda Accord popped out at me. It was listed for only $2,500, an absolute steal. Hondas with low mileage typically go for at least double that price. According to the ad, the car had less than 80 miles on it, and the exterior was in great condition. The seller explained he needed to get rid of it quickly because he was being deployed soon. He wanted a fast, easy sale. I stared in disbelief at the photos of the shiny black Honda. It looked brand new. The interior was spotless and the paint job immaculate. This seemed like an almost too good to be true situation. I hesitated before responding to the ad. My buddy Rob always warned me that unbelievably good deals are often scams. But I couldn't stop thinking about all the money I'd save if this car was legit. I could finally move out of my cramped studio apartment and into somewhere nicer. The temptation overrode my common sense, so I emailed the seller to arrange a test drive. The next evening I arrived at the seller's home, my heart racing with anticipation. Sure enough, the Honda Accord was parked in the driveway looking every bit as sleek as the pictures implied. I introduced myself to the seller, a man of my age named Tim. He invited me to take the car for a spin. I slid into the driver's seat and was impressed by the spotless interior. The black leather seats were soft and supple, with no rips or stains. The dash and steering wheel appeared brand new. I turned the key in the ignition and the car purred to life instantly. I took it for a 20-minute test drive on the highway and side streets. The car handled beautifully with no issues accelerating, braking, or turning. Everything felt tight and responsive. When I pulled back into Tim's driveway, I was thrilled. It drove like a brand new car. I asked him again why he was getting rid of such a nice ride so cheaply. He told me his deployment was sudden and he just wanted a quick sale before leaving the country. I knew Rob would kill me for doing this, but I made an offer on the spot for the asking price. Tim agreed and we signed the paperwork. The 2009 Honda Accord was all mine. That first week driving the Honda was pure bliss. With the windows down and music blasting, I felt like $1,000,000 cruising around town in my sweet new ride. I kept expecting something to go wrong, but the car ran flawlessly. About 2 weeks after the purchase, however, I ran into my first issue. The car suddenly died on me while waiting at a red light. It took me a few tries turning the ignition before it sputtered back to life. I chalked it up as a fluke incident since it drove fine the rest of the way home. Over the next month, the random stalling incidents became more frequent. The Honda would be running great down the highway, then suddenly lose power for a few minutes before starting again. Other times it would refuse to start at all and stopped at a light. I took it to a mechanic who could not figure out the cause. He replaced the spark plugs and fuel injectors, but the stalling persisted. He scratches his head, looking confused by the lack of apparent issues. One night driving home from work on the dark highway, the car died and would not restart. I had to cross 3 lanes of rushing traffic during rush hour to reach the shoulder. My heart pounded as cars and trucks whizzed past me by inches, honking their horns. Shaken, I sat there waiting for roadside assistance when the Honda suddenly sputtered back to life. I spit home rattled from almost being involved in a fatal pileup. In addition to the stalling, other strange mechanical and electrical issues began popping up. The CD player would blast static at full volume for no reason. The rearview camera would turn on randomly as I drove, even though I was not in reverse. One morning, the car alarm went off for 20 minutes straight, finally stopping when I opened the driver's side door. At night, while parked in my driveway, I'd sometimes hear the locks rapidly clicking up and down on their own. Most disturbing were the bizarre noises that started coming from the back seat and trunk. Rattling sounds that set my nerves on edge, like someone rummaging around inside the car's interior while I drove. Scratching noises that made my neck hairs stand up. I constantly felt uneasy, as if there was an unseen presence riding with me even when alone in the vehicle. My friends laughed it off, joking the car was possessed. But I knew something was terribly wrong. One morning, when I opened the trunk to grab my work bag, an overpowering stench wafted out. A nauseating, musty odor like a damp, moldy cellar. There was also a faint metallic tinge, as if from old dried blood. No matter how many times I cleaned the car or left the trunk open to air out, the putrid smell stubbornly lingered. By this point, I knew I needed to investigate the true history of this too-good-to-be-true car. I ran a vehicle history report and felt the blood drain from my face as I read the results. This Honda had belonged to a man named Ronald West, a notorious serial killer who kidnapped and murdered at least a dozen victims in the 1990s. Many of the bodies were found decomposing in the trunk of his car before he was finally captured. Ronald West ultimately died in prison 5 years ago by suicide. Afterwards, the car passed his nephew, who fixed it up nicely and must have been the Tim I bought it from. I sat there stunned, waves of nausea washing over me. I went immediately to the police and told them everything, begging them to take the car. They said they would try to investigate, but given Ronald West died years ago, there was likely little they could do. I never heard back from them after that. I decided to just junk the Honda. As it was being loaded onto the scrapyard's top truck, I could have sworn I saw the trunk pop open slightly on its own. My whole body tensed up, expecting something horrific to crawl out. Thankfully, it stayed shut. After watching it get hauled off to be destroyed, I finally felt at peace again. I'm grateful I escaped without harm from that nightmare car. However, the chilling experience haunts me to this day. I should have trusted my gut instead of jumping at a too-good-to-be-true deal. Desperation to save money had blinded me from recognizing the evil I invited into my life. While my mistake is in the past, I still occasionally have nightmares of being trapped again in that Honda, hearing the ghastly scratching sounds draw nearer. Let my warning serve as a cautionary tale before making any big purchases. Some opportunities are simply not worth the risk when dangers linger beneath the surface. I'm just thankful I escaped before the darkness consumed me entirely. When my wife and I bought our first house last year, we were bursting with enthusiasm and excitement to finally have a place of our own to call home. But we quickly realized the dated property needed a lot of work. The kitchen seemed frozen in time from the 1960s, with drab cabinets, peeling laminate countertops, and appliances that were older than we were. The bathrooms were straight out of a 70s decor magazine, with worn tile, yellowed fixtures, and shag carpeting. And the backyard was a jumble of overgrown weeds and bushes that hadn't been maintained in decades. My wife and I were eager to renovate and make the space our own, but we were on a very tight budget. After getting quotes from professional contractors that seemed astronomical, I suggested we could save a lot of money by hiring handymen from Craigslist instead. My wife was understandably hesitant about finding labor on the classified site, worrying we'd get unreliable workers or end up with shoddy workmanship. But I convinced her that as long as we were smart about vetting anyone we hired, we could get the same quality of work for half the cost by using independent laborers looking for side jobs. The affordable rates on Craigslist seemed like our best option to renovate within our limited means. After some searching, we came across an ad for a handyman named Tom who claimed over 15 years of construction experience and the skills to tackle any home renovation project, big or small. His listed rates were almost unbelievably cheap at just $20 an hour. It felt too good to be true, but after reading his glowing reviews, we felt reassured. We decided to meet Tom at the house and see if he'd be a good fit. Tom arrived right on time, dressed professionally in work boots and carrying a toolbox. He was friendly and charming right off the bat with a warm, firm handshake. We showed Tom around the house room by room so he could assess the projects on our wish list: a full kitchen gut and remodel, replacing all the bathroom tile, knocking down walls to open up the cramped living room, refinishing the outdated hardwood floors, and landscaping the jumble of the backyard. Tom said it would be no problem to transform these spaces and gave us a reasonable project estimate with a fixed total price up front. My wife and I excitedly agreed to move forward, and I wrote Tom a check for half the quote to cover materials up front as requested. We were thrilled to have found what seemed like the perfect handyman for our budget renovation. The first week went smoothly and productively. Tom arrived early each morning with a small crew, and they worked nonstop. They completed demo on the kitchen and prepped the new framing and layout. Tom conferred with us on cabinet selection and finishes, which my wife and I appreciated. His craftsmanship and project management skills appeared sharp and on point. But things started to shift in week 2. Tom began showing up late without calling, often hours past his scheduled arrival time. When I asked about these unexplained delays, Tom became defensive and irritable, saying bluntly that he was doing us a favor working for so little and we needed to be more flexible with his unpredictable schedule. My wife and I were disappointed by his unprofessional attitude, but let it go, assuming it was just standard building delays. However, more serious red flags appeared when we realized Tom was making major changes to the project without consulting us first. For instance, when we arrived home one day, not only had Tom knocked down the one living room wall we requested, but he had torn down 2 additional walls as well, completely reconfiguring the layout of the first floor. We were shocked he would alter the entire floor plan without asking. But when we questioned Tom, he turned angry and condescending, insisting he knew better than us what the house needed. His domineering attitude was a far cry from the warm, collaborative handyman we'd originally hired. Things reached a boiling point when we requested an update on the project's total costs so far compared to the original estimate. Tom came back with a number nearly double the initial quote, stating the overages were on us and a new higher amount was what we now owed. We pointed out in frustration that we had a fixed price contract, but Tom shouted over us, refusing to budge on the inflated number. Feeling cornered and uneasy, we agreed under pressure to pay the extra costs just to appease him. But we realized then that the situation had veered drastically off course from the affordable renovation we'd been promised. My guard went up even higher the following day when I noticed something amiss in our master bedroom. The smoke detector on the ceiling had been completely removed, and in its place was a small black device I didn't recognize. I scoured the house further and spotted several more of these unsettling gadgets in the living room, kitchen, and basement. With mounting horror, it dawned on me. These must be hidden cameras. Tom had bugged and surveilled our own home. The violation of privacy and trust made me sick. We urgently called the police to report what had been discovered. They arrived and confirmed our worst fears. The odd devices concealed around the house were indeed secret spy cameras that had been recording us. This chilling deception and criminal monitoring of our home left my wife and me feeling violated and psychologically unsafe in a space that was supposed to be our sanctuary. The police arrested Tom, and we have all of his shoddy handiwork torn out and redone properly. But the damage of this traumatic experience was done. I bitterly regretted trying to find cheap labor on Craigslist. That decision had opened us up to a dangerous opportunist who exploited our trust and home for his own warped purposes. In retrospect, there were some clear warning signs I should have heeded. Tom's refusal to sign a detailed contract, his sudden moodiness and aggression, and his unauthorized changes to our home against our wishes. But in my foolishness, I allowed him far too much leeway and benefit of the doubt. Moving forward, we will only ever hire licensed professionals, even if that means delaying projects for financial reasons. Your home is too valuable and personal to let just anyone have access and control. This violation has forever changed how we feel about our first home, once so full of promise and happiness. Now tainted with bad memories, that innocence and sense of safety has been robbed from us. I sincerely hope others can avoid the painful lesson we learned. Sometimes when a deal seems too good to be true, it often is. Especially when inviting strangers into your home, trust needs to be earned slowly, not automatically granted based on initial impressions. We'd open ourselves up to be taken advantage of by cutting corners financially. But some things you can't put a price on, like peace of mind and comfort in your own space. That sense of security was shattered the moment those spy cameras were discovered. We escaped unharmed, but remained shaken. Moving on, we'll prioritize vetting anyone who works on our home. The financial savings don't outweigh the potential risks. I was a college junior trying to get home for winter break without going completely broke. My school was on the West Coast, but I'm originally from the Midwest. Flights around the holidays can be insanely expensive, so I decided to try finding a cheap rideshare on Craigslist. I'd used the site before to find used furniture and sublets, but never for travel plans with a stranger. I was nervous, but figured it was a pretty common way for students to save money. I connected with a guy named Mark who was headed to a city about 2 hours from my hometown. He was a teacher driving cross-country to visit family for the holidays. We exchanged a few emails and he seemed nice. Said he'd done these long drives before and didn't mind the company. We agreed on a fair price and set up a time and place to meet. The day came and I packed up my bags, ready for the 2-day trek. Mark pulled up in a silver SUV. He looked like his photos, late 30s, beard, glasses. He helped me load my suitcase and we hit the road. The first hour or so was pretty quiet as we got a feel for each other. Eventually, we settled into casual conversation about our jobs, families, and holiday traditions back home. We stopped for lunch and I offered to pay since he was giving me such an affordable ride. He accepted and said he appreciated me chipping in for gas. So far, so good. Back on the highway, we had about 6 more hours to go that day. The terrain gradually changed from green coastal hills to flat open plains. About 4 hours and Mark got quiet. I asked him how he was doing and he snapped that he was trying to focus on driving. I nodded and turned my attention out the window. After a few minutes, he turned up the music to a deafening volume. I reached to turn it down and he slapped my hand away. "Don't touch that," he yelled. Confused, I withdrew and glanced over at him. His face was tense, eyes wild, hands gripping the wheel. He began driving erratically, speeding up then slamming on brakes. He swerved between lanes, cutting off other cars and forcing them to honk. I asked him to slow down, but he pretended not to hear me over the blaring stereo. I was getting really freaked out. This was not the friendly, mild-mannered guy I had hung out with. I tried to rationalize the sudden change in his behavior. Maybe he was just tired or cranky from the long drive. Or he had gotten some bad news before picking me up and was taking out in anger behind the wheel. Either way, I just wanted the trip to end safely. Still 6 hours from our stop for the night, I was trapped. I considered asking him to pull over and let me out, but we were in the middle of nowhere on a 2-lane highway. No towns, no exits, just empty wilderness. I wouldn't make it far walking in any direction. So I just white-knuckled it for hours, praying under my breath whenever he made erratic lane changes or breakneck speed increases. I kept my eyes glued out the window as the sun set, hoping to appear calm. Inside, my mind raced with worst-case scenarios. I had family waiting for me, friends expecting calls that night to confirm I'd arrived safely. Would any of them know something went wrong before it was too late? As we neared the hotel, I felt my adrenaline pumping. I decided that when he stopped, I would make up an excuse to get out, say I felt carsick and needed fresh air, or had to find a drugstore for medicine. Anything to get out and away. But as we exited the highway, Mark was suddenly his old self again. His grip on the wheel relaxed. He turned the music down to a normal volume. He politely asked how I was doing and if I needed to stop anywhere before the hotel. I cautiously said I was fine now and just wanted to rest. We pulled into the parking lot without incident. He grabbed my bag from the trunk as I stepped out on shaky legs. We walked to the lobby and he left me with a friendly "see you in the morning" before going to his room. I considered asking the front desk to switch my room or calling the police. But without evidence, what could I say? A man drove badly for a few hours but otherwise acted normal. They'd think I was paranoid or delusional. But I knew what I'd experienced. His sudden change in behavior filled me with dread at the time, like the glimpse of a hidden, sinister personality. I barely slept, checking that my door was locked and startling to every hallway noise. In the morning, Mark was again perfectly pleasant at breakfast while I nervously picked at my food. The second day of driving was smooth, his mood stayed consistent. We arrived at my hometown without another incident. He helped with my bags, wished me happy holidays, and drove off. I still wonder who or what I encountered out there in the vast open plains. I'll never accept another cross-country rideshare again, no matter the cost. It's just not worth the risk. My ordinary trip turned briefly disturbing at the hands of a smiling stranger. I'm thankful I escaped unharmed. I went on Craigslist a few weeks before my last final and searched the rideshare section. There were a bunch of posts for people looking for riders to fill up their cars on long trips. I filtered by dates and locations until I found one that seemed like a match, a guy named Mark who was driving from California to Iowa for the holidays. According to his post, he was planning to leave on the 16th and make it a 2-day drive with an overnight stop partway. His destination was just a couple hours from my hometown in Wisconsin. I sent him a response expressing interest, and we exchanged a few emails. He seemed nice in his messages. Said he had made this drive a couple times before and enjoyed the company. We agreed on a fair price for me to chip in for gas and split hotel costs. He sent me photos of his ID and car so I knew what to look for. Everything checked out and we confirmed plans to meet the morning of the 16th to begin our trip. The day came and I packed up all of my belongings for my dorm since I wouldn't be coming back till next term. Right on time, a silver SUV pulled up with Mark behind the wheel. He rolled down the window and waved me over. He looked pleasant, late 30s, average build, beard, thick framed glasses. We loaded my bags and a cooler of road trip snacks into the trunk. Mark was focused on driving, and I was feeling shy and nervous about the long trip with someone I'd never met. We stopped for a fast food lunch, and I paid since Mark was providing me with such an affordable ride. He seemed to appreciate the gesture. Full and refreshed from the break, we got back on the road. We had about 6 more hours of driving ahead before we would stop for the night. Mark and I settled into easy chatter, listening to music and pointing out funny billboards. The first half of day one passed smoothly, and I was feeling good about my decision to go this budget route home for break. But around hour 4 of driving, I noticed Mark getting quiet. I asked casually if he was doing all right or needed me to drive for a bit. He snapped that he was perfectly fine, just focused on the road. I nodded and turned my attention back to the window, a little put off by his sudden sharp tone. The music changed to a heavy metal station blasting at full volume. I reached out to turn down the deafening music, and Mark smacked my hand away from the dial, yelling, "Don't touch that." I was startled and pulled my hand back, rubbing it from the sting. I glanced over at Mark, and his face seemed strained, eyes wild, and hands clenched tightly on the steering wheel. He suddenly sped up, weaving recklessly between cars as other drivers honked angrily. I asked Mark to slow down, my voice shaky with adrenaline. He ignored me, continuing to accelerate. I gripped the handle above the door, heart pounding. This friendly, mild-mannered teacher had rapidly transformed before my eyes into a dangerous stranger. I racked my brain trying to understand this alarming change. Maybe he had just gotten some bad news before picking me up that made him upset, or the long drive was wearing on him and he dealt with stress by driving aggressively. Either way, I just wanted the trip to end without incident. I just stayed silent, eyes glued to the horizon, praying we didn't crash. I kept my body turned away from Mark and tried to appear calm, despite feeling ready to scream in panic. The sun gradually set and darkness fell over the lonely highway. The hours crawled by at Mark's unpredictable speeds. Sometimes we cruised normally with the high beams cutting through the black night. Other times he inexplicably slammed the brakes or tore past tractor trailers doing 90 miles per hour. All I could do was grip my seatbelt and pretend to sleep. Finally, around midnight, we neared the exit for our overnight stop. I decided I would make up an excuse to exit the car quickly and get inside where I could ask the hotel staff for help. I thought about saying I felt suddenly carsick or that I needed to find a drugstore urgently for medicine. Anything to get out of the confined space with this volatile stranger. But as we pulled into the hotel parking lot, Mark's entire demeanor changed again. His shoulders relaxed, he turned down the deafening music, and drove the SUV calmly into a spot. He gave me a polite smile and asked if I was tired from the drive or needed to pick anything up before turning in for the night. I cautiously said I felt fine now and just wanted to head to my room to sleep. We walked into the lobby together and Mark left me at the front desk with a courteous "see you in the morning" before going to his own room for the night. My hands shook as I checked in and got my key card. I considered telling the staff what had happened and asking them to call the police or at least switch my room. But without evidence or harm done, what could I really say? Exhausted both physically and mentally, I collapsed into bed without even changing clothes. I double-checked that my door was locked and started at any noise in the hallway. My mind raced all night thinking about the drive ahead. I needed to make it through one more day to reach home safely. In the morning, I dragged myself down to the hotel breakfast bar. Mark was there eating a waffle and smiled warmly when he saw me. I kept my responses minimal as I poured some coffee, hands shaking slightly. His entire freak-out last night may as well have never happened. We hit the road again for the second day of driving. I was tense, braced for Mark's sudden rage to return behind the wheel. But the trip was smooth. Mark maintained the speed limit, stopped politely for food and gas, and made normal highway conversation. The miles ticked by, and soon we were approaching my hometown. It was like driving with an entirely different person. We exited the highway without incident, and Mark helped unload my bags from the trunk. He wished me happy holidays, said he'd had pleasant drives with previous rideshare riders, and hoped to see me on the site again if I ever needed a West Coast trip. I thanked him, hands still trembling slightly as I pulled my suitcase towards home. I watched his taillights disappear down the street, more confused than ever about what exactly happened on those open highways. I made it home to my family without telling them about the rideshare or Mark's disturbing behavior. It still haunts me wondering who or what I encountered out there. I'll never accept another cross-country stranger ride again, no matter the cost savings. It's just not worth the risk after what I experienced. My ordinary college budget trip turned briefly terrifying at the hands of a smiling stranger. I'm thankful I escaped unharmed with a story to caution others. But the darkness I glimpsed still lingers, leaving questions that may never be answered. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.